The morning light poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Clara Evans's penthouse, painting everything in gold except her eyes. They were empty. In her hand was a white envelope that had mocked her for weeks. The names printed in perfect silver foil read, Ethan Crawford and Lily Hayes, her ex-fiancé, her former assistant. The betrayal couldn't have been scripted more perfectly for the tabloids. Clara had built a media empire from nothing, turned her name into power, but at this moment, standing alone in silence, she felt like a failure no headline could hide. The woman who ruled boardrooms couldn't control the ache in her chest. She set the invitation down beside a half-finished glass of champagne, the kind she used to celebrate success, but now tasted like regret. Her reflection in the glass looked strong, untouchable, but the truth was written in the tremor of her hand. She whispered to herself, "You built an empire, but couldn't build a love that lasted." And then, a question rose inside her like a dare. What happens when the woman who lost everything decides to walk back into the fire? Because sometimes the only way to heal a wound is to face the person who caused it. Clara Evans didn't believe in signs. She believed in control, in plans, in flawless execution. But that afternoon, fate decided to laugh at her. It was 3 weeks before the wedding. She had just left a community outreach meeting downtown, the kind of charity event her PR team insisted she attend to polish her public image. The moment she stepped outside, the skies cracked open with rain and her sleek black Mercedes sputtered to a stop in the middle of a working-class neighborhood she had never set foot in. Her driver had gone to pick up supplies. Her phone had 1 bar of service. For the first time in years, Clara Evans was stranded and powerless. She stood beneath a flickering streetlight, clutching her coat against the wind, feeling the sting of water soaking through silk. Around her, life moved differently. The air smelled of wet pavement and street food. Laughter echoed from open windows. And somewhere nearby, a child's voice rose in frustration. "Dad, I can't do it. I keep falling." Clara turned. Across the narrow park, a man in worn jeans and a flannel shirt crouched beside a little girl. The child's pink helmet was slightly crooked, her small hands gripping the handlebars of a bicycle that looked almost too big for her. The man's voice was calm, steady, patient. "It's okay, Sophie. We fall. We get back up. That's how we learn to fly." The words slipped through the rain like sunlight. Clara froze. Something about the way he said them stopped her heart for a moment. There was no performance, no pretense, just quiet strength. The kind that didn't need an audience. The girl tried again, wobbling down the path, laughter replacing tears as she found her balance. The man ran beside her, cheering softly, his face lit by the dim glow of the streetlights. He wasn't handsome in the polished boardroom way she was used to, but there was warmth in him. Real warmth. The kind that couldn't be faked. For reasons she couldn't explain, Clara felt a lump rise in her throat. She, who could close million-dollar deals without blinking, suddenly couldn't look away from a stranger teaching his daughter how to ride a bike. When her driver finally returned, she was still watching them. "Ma'am, are you all right?" he asked. Clara blinked, startled. Yes, I'm fine." But her voice didn't sound like her own. Before leaving, she took one last glance at the park. The man was helping the girl pick up her fallen helmet, laughing when she teased him for running out of breath. Something inside Clara stirred. Something long buried beneath ambition and heartbreak. She didn't know it yet, but she would remember that voice, that smile, that tiny spark of sincerity that felt foreign in her carefully controlled world. Later that evening, back in her penthouse, she found herself searching the name she had seen printed on a nearby community sign, Daniel Harper, volunteer coordinator. She told herself it was curiosity, nothing more, but even as she typed, her fingers trembled, and somewhere deep inside, a thought whispered, maybe the universe hadn't left her stranded by accident, because sometimes the most unexpected detours lead straight to the people we were meant to meet. 3 weeks had passed since that rainy afternoon, but Clara Evans still couldn't shake the image of the man in the park. The memory had followed her like a faint melody she couldn't forget. His voice, his patience, that quiet strength in the way he spoke to his daughter. It had become something she thought about at odd hours, when the city outside her penthouse was asleep and silence pressed too heavily on her chest. Then came the wedding invitation again, lying on her desk like a challenge. The names Ethan Crawford and Lily Hayes gleamed under the lamp. She could already imagine the whispers that would fill the room if she didn't attend. Clara Evans, the ex who couldn't move on. In her world, perception was everything. Weakness was blood in the water. She picked up her phone before she could talk herself out of it. The number she dialed was one she had found on a flyer from the community center. The voice on the other end was calm, familiar. "This is Daniel Harper." Clara hesitated for the first time in years. "Mr. Harper, this is Clara Evans. We met, well, sort of met, a few weeks ago near the park. I have a rather unusual proposal." He was silent, polite but cautious. "I'm listening." "I need someone to accompany me to a wedding this Saturday," she said quickly. Her tone clipped, professional. "It's a business event, purely for appearances. I'll compensate you for your time." "Of course." There was a pause long enough for her to doubt herself. Then Daniel spoke, slow and measured. "Miss Evans? I'm not sure we move in the same circles." Clara exhaled sharply. "That's exactly why this will work. You're not part of that world. You're genuine. You'll make me look grounded." Another pause. She could almost hear him smiling faintly. "You want me to pretend to be your boyfriend, don't you?" "Let's call it a professional arrangement," she replied, a little too fast. Daniel chuckled softly, the sound disarming her more than she wanted to admit. "And what would a man like me wear to something like that?" "I'll handle everything," she said. "A stylist, transportation, whatever you need." He didn't answer right away. When he finally did, his tone was thoughtful. "Why me?" The question caught her off guard. "Because I remembered how you spoke to your daughter," she admitted, her voice softer than before. "It sounded like the kind of honesty people pretend to have in my world. I could use a bit of that right now." Silence stretched between them again. Then Daniel said quietly, "I don't do this sort of thing, but maybe it wouldn't hurt to see what happens when two worlds collide." Clara blinked, surprised by her own relief. "So you'll come?" "I will," he said simply. "Not for the money, just curiosity." When the call ended, Clara stared at her reflection in the dark window. Her pulse was racing, though she couldn't explain why. This was supposed to be practical, strategic, but somewhere deep inside, it felt like she had just set something unpredictable in motion. Outside, the city lights shimmered below like fallen stars, and for the first time in years, Clara Evans wasn't entirely sure what she was getting herself into. The day of the wedding arrived like a storm Clara had seen coming but couldn't escape. Thornfield Estate gleamed under the afternoon sun, a palace of glass and marble filled with people who thrived on gossip disguised as champagne toasts. Every chandelier sparkled like it had been polished just to mock her. Clara stepped out of the car, her hand resting lightly on Daniel Harper's arm. The tuxedo fit him perfectly, though his quiet confidence made it look even better. Heads turned immediately. Whispered questions rippled through the crowd. "Is that Clara Evans? Who's the man with her?" Daniel didn't flinch under the curious stares. He carried himself with an ease that didn't come from wealth but from self-respect. Clara noticed it. She had spent years surrounded by men in suits who spoke loudly to prove their worth. Daniel didn't have to. His silence said more than any of them. Inside, a string quartet played something elegant and painfully slow. The air smelled of roses and ambition. Clara kept her chin high, every step rehearsed, every smile controlled. But when her eyes met Ethan Crawford across the room, her heart stuttered. He looked exactly the same and completely different at once. Same charming grin, same tailored arrogance. Only now, he belonged to someone else. His new bride, Lily Hayes, glowed with the fresh confidence of youth. She looked both radiant and fragile, the kind of woman who still believed in forever. Clara remembered when she had looked like that. Ethan approached with that familiar smirk she used to mistake for affection. "Clara," he said warmly, too warmly, "it's good to see you." She smiled back, polite but cold. "Ethan, congratulations. The venue is stunning. Very on brand. His gaze slid to Daniel, standing beside her with calm composure. And who might this be? Clara's voice didn't waver. Daniel Harper, my partner. A flicker of surprise crossed Ethan's face before he laughed softly. How refreshing to see you exploring new demographics. The insult was dressed as humor, but the venom was unmistakable. Several nearby guests chuckled nervously. Clara felt the heat rise in her chest, the familiar burn of humiliation she had promised herself she'd never feel again. Before she could respond, Daniel moved. He stood slowly, meeting Ethan's eyes without a trace of aggression. His voice was steady, low, and carried across the table. In my line of work, he said, the strongest foundations are built on respect and integrity. The words hung in the air like thunder after lightning. The laughter died instantly. Even the music seemed to pause. Ethan's confident smile faltered. Daniel didn't look angry, only certain. That certainty filled the room. Quiet, but undeniable. For the first time that evening, Clara felt safe. No one had ever spoken for her like that. Not her colleagues, not her friends, not even the man who once promised to love her. Ethan cleared his throat and muttered something about greeting other guests. His bride tugged gently at his arm. Embarrassed, they walked away, leaving silence in their wake. Clara turned to Daniel, her voice barely above a whisper. You didn't have to do that. He smiled softly. Yes, I did. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Around them, conversation resumed. Laughter returned. The orchestra swelled again, but something inside Clara shifted. It wasn't revenge, it was release. And as Daniel offered his hand to lead her to the dance floor, she realized that for the first time in years, someone had stood beside her not because of her power, but because of who she really was. The orchestra shifted to a slow melody, one of those timeless waltzes that made the chandeliers seem to breathe with the rhythm. Clara had barely recovered from the confrontation when Daniel turned to her and offered his hand. Dance with me, he said, his voice calm, almost tender. For a moment she hesitated. She had danced in rooms like this countless times before, but always out of obligation, always for appearance. This time felt different. Something about the way he stood there, patient, unassuming, made her want to say yes. She placed her hand in his. His palm was warm, steady. The music wrapped around them as they moved to the center of the floor. Conversation softened. Even the air seemed to shift, as if the world itself had decided to slow down for them. Clara expected him to be awkward, maybe uncertain, but Daniel moved with effortless grace. Each step was sure, unhurried, perfectly in tune with the music. It caught her off guard. She looked up at him, eyebrows slightly raised. How do you know how to dance like this? He smiled. And for the first time that evening, the smile reached his eyes. Sophie made me learn. She says every gentleman should know how to dance. Clara let out a soft laugh, the kind that sounded foreign even to her own ears. She sounds like quite the teacher. She is, he said, his voice touched with pride. She told me dancing isn't about knowing the steps. It's about listening. If you don't listen, you'll always step on someone's feet. Clara looked at him, caught off guard again. That's surprisingly wise. He chuckled. She's 6. I take no credit. For the first time in years, Clara felt her guard slipping away. The tension that had ruled her every move began to dissolve under the soft glow of the chandeliers. Around them, the elite of the city continued their polished charade. But inside this small circle of music and motion, the world felt honest. As they turned, Daniel's hand found the small of her back, guiding her with quiet certainty. His touch wasn't possessive or rehearsed. It was protective, natural, the kind of gesture that said you're safe here. Clara met his gaze. There was no pity in his eyes, only understanding. It startled her how easily he seemed to see her, the real her, not the version the world adored or feared. The music swelled. For a brief, dizzying moment, Clara forgot the guests, the whispers, even Ethan. It was just the two of them, her heart sinking to a rhythm she thought she had forgotten long ago. When the song ended, they stood still for a moment, unwilling to let go. Daniel broke the silence first. "You're good at this," he said softly. "I had a lot of practice pretending to be," she replied, her smile trembling at the edges. He looked at her, and something in his gaze lingered. "Maybe you don't need to pretend anymore." Clara didn't answer. She couldn't. Her throat tightened, and for the first time that night, she realized how exhausted she was from carrying the armor she wore every day. The applause from nearby tables pulled her back to reality, but the warmth in Daniel's eyes stayed with her as he led her away from the dance floor. A quiet thought bloomed in her chest, one she hadn't dared feel in years. Maybe, just maybe, this wasn't about appearances anymore. Maybe it was about beginning to feel alive again. Later that night, the ballroom glowed with laughter and music, but Clara needed air. She slipped away from the crowd and stepped out onto the terrace overlooking the gardens of Thornfield Estate. The cool night brushed against her skin, carrying the faint scent of roses and champagne. She leaned on the marble railing, watching the glittering lights below blur into soft gold. For the first time all evening, she could breathe. Behind her, she heard footsteps. Daniel appeared, his tie loosened, the warmth of the party still clinging to him. He didn't speak at first. He simply stood beside her, close enough that she could feel his presence without needing to look. "You disappeared," he said finally. "I needed a moment," she replied, her voice quieter than she expected. Daniel nodded, eyes scanning the night. "Beautiful view," he said. Clara smiled faintly. "Everything looks beautiful from far away. Up close, you start to see the cracks." "Oh," he glanced at her, hearing more in her tone than she intended to reveal. "You're not talking about the view, are you?" She hesitated, then let out a breath that trembled slightly. 3 weeks before my wedding, I found out Ethan was seeing Lily, my assistant. I read about it in a gossip column before I heard it from him." Her voice hardened, then cracked. "Do you know what that does to a person? To wake up and realize you were just a headline waiting to happen?" Daniel didn't interrupt. He listened, and that simple act, someone actually listening, made the words spill faster. "I kept working. I smiled for cameras. I told everyone I was fine. But I wasn't. I built walls around myself so high. I stopped feeling anything at all." When she finally looked at him, her eyes shimmered. "What about you? You speak like a man who's known heartbreak too." He nodded slowly. My wife left 2 years ago. Said she couldn't handle the pressure, or the noise, or maybe just me. I thought if I worked harder, if I became someone worth staying for, she'd come back. But she didn't." Clara's eyes softened. "That must have been unbearable." Daniel looked down at his hands, rough from years of work, then back at her. "It was for a while. But Sophie taught me something. You can't let someone else's limitations define your capacity for love." The words hit her like a wave. She turned her head away. But it was too late. The tears came, silent at first, then heavier, breaking through the composure she had guarded so fiercely. Daniel moved closer, his voice low. "You don't have to apologize for feeling. Pain isn't weakness. It's proof you're still alive." Clara wiped her face, laughing softly through her tears. "I can't remember the last time someone said something real to me. That's because most people are afraid of real," he said gently. "But you don't strike me as someone who runs from it." She met his gaze, the distance between them shrinking. The sounds of the party inside faded into the background, replaced by the hum of night and the quiet beating of her heart. For the first time in 3 years, Clara felt seen. Not as a CEO, not as a broken engagement or a name on a magazine cover, just her. She didn't know what this meant or where it would lead, but as she sat beside Daniel under the soft glow of the terrace lights, one thought lingered in her mind like a promise. Maybe healing wasn't about moving on. Maybe it was about finally letting someone in. The night had grown quieter. The music inside faded into a distant hum, leaving only the soft chirping of crickets and the faint rustle of the garden below. Clara and Daniel remained on the terrace, the silence between them no longer heavy, but strangely comfortable. The kind of silence that doesn't demand words because it already understands them. Clara turned slightly toward him, studying his face in the golden glow of the terrace light. "Can I ask you something?" she said. Daniel nodded. "Of course. Why did you agree to come tonight?" Her voice was gentle but curious, as if she needed to understand something deeper than his answer could possibly give. Daniel looked out toward the gardens, his hands resting casually on the railing. For a long moment, he didn't speak. When he finally did, his voice carried that same calm steadiness that had drawn her in from the very beginning. "The first time I saw you," he said, "was at the community center. You were surrounded by people in suits, asking questions about the kids' programs. Everyone else treated it like a publicity stop. But you stayed after the cameras left." Clara's brow furrowed. "You were there?" He nodded. "I was fixing a broken shelf in one of the classrooms. You didn't notice me, but I noticed you." He smiled faintly, the memory softening his expression. "A little boy spilled juice on your expensive white suit. Everyone froze, waiting for the storm. But you just laughed. You knelt down, helped him clean up, and told him accidents happen to everyone. That kind of kindness, it doesn't come from image, it comes from truth." Clara felt her chest tighten, remembering the moment vividly. The child's name had been Leo. She hadn't thought anyone had seen it. Daniel continued quietly. "You didn't act like someone untouchable. You cared. That's why I said yes, not for the money. I wanted to see if the woman I saw that day was real." His words settled in the air between them. Simple and sincere. Clara looked down, her heart beating faster than she wanted to admit. "And? What do you think now?" He met her gaze. "I think she's even more real than I imagined." For a moment, neither of them moved. The air around them felt electric, alive with something unspoken. Clara smiled faintly, her voice soft but trembling. "I'd like to meet Sophie someday." Daniel's lips curved into a quiet smile. "She already knows about you." Clara blinked, surprised. "She does?" "Yes," he said, a hint of amusement in his tone. "She's been asking about the lady who helped Leo with his juice. She said anyone who can make a kid smile in a suit like that must be special." Clara laughed, tears welling again, but gentler this time. "She sounds wonderful." "She is," Daniel said simply, "and she's going to love you." They sat there in silence, the stars shimmering faintly above them. There were no declarations, no dramatic confessions, yet something far more powerful filled the space between them. It wasn't the beginning of a romance built on words. It was something quieter, steadier, the fragile birth of trust. Clara turned her gaze back to the garden, her reflection faint in the glass door behind them. For the first time in years, she didn't feel like a woman defined by what she had lost. She felt like someone who might be ready to love again. Inside, the music shifted to a final slow song. Daniel stood, offering his hand once more, that same calm certainty in his eyes. Clara took it without hesitation this time, and as they walked back inside together, the night didn't feel heavy anymore. It felt like a beginning. 6 months later, the air felt different, the city was the same, but to Clara Evans, everything had changed. The walls she had built around herself were still there, but softer now, no longer made of steel, but of understanding. That morning, she walked through the gates of the community center, carrying a small box of children's books, the same place where she once stood as a guest of honor, distant and untouchable, now welcomed her as one of its own. Children's laughter spilled through the hallways, and the sound felt like sunlight. Inside, Daniel Harper was surrounded by a small crowd of mothers and kids. He was teaching them how to fix leaking faucets and loose cabinet handles. His hands, strong yet patient, guided them with ease. Sophie ran around nearby, giggling as she held a screwdriver twice her size. When she spotted Clara at the doorway, her face lit up. "Clara!" she called, running into her arms. Clara lifted her effortlessly, spinning the little girl as laughter filled the air. "You came! I told you I would," Clara said, smiling, "and I brought stories." Daniel turned from his group, his eyes meeting hers. The same quiet steadiness was still there, but now it carried something more. a shared warmth, a connection shaped not by circumstance but by choice. After his class ended, they all gathered in the reading corner. Clara sat cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by children. Sophie tucked close beside her. She opened a book and began to read, her voice calm and full of life. Every few minutes, she glanced up and caught Daniel watching her, his expression soft, almost proud. When the last story ended, Sophie leaned against her shoulder and whispered, "You sound like home." Clara froze for a second, her eyes stinging. It had been so long since anything felt like home. Later that afternoon, as sunlight filtered through the tall windows, Clara stepped into Daniel's workshop. Tools hung neatly on the wall, and the smell of wood and oil filled the air. On a small table in the corner sat a wooden memory box. Inside, nestled among keepsakes and family photos, lay the old wedding invitation that had once haunted her. She traced the edge of the envelope with her fingertips, then smiled. The pain was still there, faint but harmless now, like a scar that no longer ached. She placed the lid gently back on the box and turned toward the sound of laughter from the next room. Through the doorway, she saw Daniel helping Sophie tighten a screw, their laughter blending like a familiar song. The sight filled her with a peace she hadn't known in years. The narrator's voice rose softly, almost like a thought carried on the wind. Sometimes healing isn't about avoiding the places that hurt us, but returning to them with someone who helps us see them differently. The camera lingered on Clara's smile as she joined them, wiping a streak of dust from Daniel's cheek while Sophie giggled between them. She hired him to protect her image, the voice continued, but he ended up saving her heart. The scene faded slowly, leaving only the sound of laughter echoing through the sunlight. A quiet reminder that love does not always arrive with grand gestures. Sometimes it simply walks beside you, helps you rebuild, and shows you that even the most broken hearts can bloom again. Clara Evans thought she was hiring a stranger to protect her image at her ex's wedding, but instead, she found the man who helped her heal. A powerful story about second chances, quiet courage, and the beauty of love reborn from pain. If this story touched your heart, show your support, give this video a like, share it with someone who believes in hope after heartbreak, and subscribe for more emotional stories that remind us love always finds a way back. Because sometimes the most unexpected people become the ones who save us.